I'm former Navy SEAL Team 6 Squadron Leader Chuck Farr, and today we're going to take a close look into Russia's campaign of Baltic Sea sabotage. So put on your wetsuits and join me for an underwater edition of the Kyiv Post's Point of Impact. Though it seems like a distant memory, the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines were ripped apart in a series of underwater explosions on September 26, 2022.
Всем же очевидно, кому это выгодно. Кому выгодно, тот и сделал, конечно.
На Балтике взорвали газопровод. Кому-то снова надо разогреть серьезный конфликт.
In those innocent times, some voices, abetted by Russian propaganda, tried to blame the sabotage on Ukraine. It had to be Ukraine, right? Not so fast, underwater Sherlock. Why, they asked, would Russia sabotage their own pipeline? Some outlets, including the New York Times, even went so far as to preposterously blame unknown Ukrainian conspirators in a rented sailboat. Well, as a Navy SEAL, a demolitions expert, and a trained maritime saboteur, let me assure you that it would be physically impossible, as well as idiotic, to claim that a team of amateur frogmen and women could have used a rented sailing yacht to sabotage Nord Stream 1 and 2. The diving is too complex. The necessary equipment's too big. The sailboat's navigation and positioning systems are too crude to ever even locate the pipeline on the seafloor, let alone be used as a stable platform to host, deploy, and recover the numerous dives necessary to interdict the pipeline. But to add insult to idiocy, the anti-Ukrainian news organizations attempting to prove Ukraine was the culprit were forced to rent diving expedition vessels and not sailboats when they found that the equipment needed for a film crew wouldn't fit aboard a 15-meter sailing yacht. Just the cameras, let alone the explosives, frogmen, diving gear, life support, sonar, navigation equipment, and all the other bits and bobs necessary for a good old sabotage operation. Oh, and food and water. So there are only a handful of naval special operators in the world capable of carrying out the Nord Stream 1 and 2 operation. And on the NATO side, the number is so small, we all basically know one another, which leaves, well, the other side. The semi-open circuit mixed gas breathing diving equipment that's used for this operation is exotic and hard to source. Training on these rigs is dangerous and usually reserved for a small handful of military operators. As well as insertion and the black art of application of explosives in complex underwater demolition operations, the handful of men and women capable of carrying out this operation is extremely limited. Nord Stream 1 and 2 sabotage operations required the resources and capability of a state actor, and that state was Russia. Case closed. But Russia planned more disruption and had more targets to sabotage. As the world began to scoff at the sailboat option, direct action was now off the table for Moscow. Russia would now resort to more obtuse, gray zone, and hybrid warfare options. Enter Operation Bad Seamanship. In the early hours of 7 October 2023, a container ship named New Polar Bear was outbound from the Russian port of St. Petersburg. After conducting her business, New Polar Bear entered the Baltic Seaway. She then dropped and dragged her port-side anchor across the Finnish-Estonian Baltic Connector natural gas pipeline. Could this have been an accident? Well, the pipeline is clearly marked on all nautical charts, printed and digital, and it's incomprehensible that any competent mariner would put to sea, clear the bar, accidentally drop and drag a multi-ton anchor across the seafloor in an area specifically marked pipe crossing, do not anchor. But yet, it happened. Nunu Polar Bear was busy, and she was not alone. In this case, Nunu Polar Bear's bad seamanship was augmented by the Russian-flagged nuclear-powered cargo ship Sevmorput, which on the same night deliberately dragged anchor across the Sweden-Estonia EES-1 submarine communications cable between Sweden and Estonia. Both ships were built with strengthened hulls, specifically to engage in Baltic and Arctic trade. Both were perfectly chosen, and both ships were definitely to blame. After damaging the cable and pipeline, Nunu Polar Bear was photographed arriving at the Russian port of Archangels with her port side damaged and her port side anchor missing on 22 October. 2 days later, the Finnish Navy, Finnish Border Guard, and the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation retrieved an anchor embedded in the seafloor next to the damaged pipeline. Nunu Polar Bear was identified as the prime suspect in the incident. Well, fully a year later, after causing tens of millions of dollars of damage to these two vital pieces of infrastructure, a Chinese investigation concluded that Nunu Polar Bear was responsible for the damage, but concluded it was an accident due to heavy weather, rather than intentional sabotage. China did not explain how competent mariners or officers could have possibly dragged anchor in a prohibited zone for hundreds of kilometers without a single person noticing. Fast forward to 15 November 2024. The Chinese bulk carrier Yiping 3 left the port of Ust-Luga in Russia, carrying a load of fertilizer. Within days, Yiping 3 was implicated in severing 2 fiber optic cables using the familiar accidental technique of dragging anchor. Yiping 3 was watched closely. Coastal radar determined that the ship was conned in a manner consistent with deliberate anchor dragging. She maintained varying courses for over 100 miles, covering restricted waters marked as the location of 2 pieces of critical marine infrastructure. At 10:00 local time on 18 November, the BCS East-West Interlink comm cable, which connects Lithuania and Sweden, was cut by Yiping's anchor. Later that same day, and close by, the Sea Lion 1 fiber cable, the only telecom asset directly linking Finland and Germany, was also cut. German Federal Defense Minister Boris Pistorius was quick to call the incident a deliberate act of sabotage.
Und wir müssen auch davon ausgehen, ohne es schon zu wissen, versteht sich, dass es sich Sabotage handelt.
Yiping 3 was identified at both scenes, and by the time she attempted to exit the Baltic, the Royal Danish Navy was following closely. Yiping 3 was detained for a few weeks as investigators were finally allowed to question the crew for 5 hours on 19 December. Chinese officials refused to let Swedish prosecutors board the vessel. On 21 December, Danish authorities watched as Yiping 3 weighed anchor, departed the Baltic, and continued to her destination, Port Said in Egypt. Clearly there was a pattern, and clearly there was going to be no punishment. This brings us to another incident of Baltic Sea sabotage, the case of the Eagle S. Eagle S is a 750-foot-long, that's 228-meter, crude oil and oil products tanker that sails under the flag of the Cook Islands. This mystery ship has sailed under a variety of names and registrations. You might say Eagle S is a card-carrying member of Russia's Shadow Fleet, vessels engaged in a quasi-legal trade in Russian oil and energy products. Eagle S's safety record speaks volumes. Sailing under a variety of owners since 2004, she's been an unlucky ship. In 2012, under the name Freight Pride, she collided with a mobile drilling platform in Aransas Pass, causing millions of dollars worth of damage. In 2014, under the name LR Mimosa, she caused an oil spill in Chile. As recently as 2023, she was detained by Ghana when authorities noted 24 defects and safety violations that made her dangerously unseaworthy. On Christmas 2024, Eagle S, now managed by Peninsular Maritime India Incorporated, departed the Russian port of Ust-Luga with a cargo of unleaded gasoline, reportedly headed to Turkey. At 12:26 local time, Christmas Day, Eagle S dragged anchor across the Eastlink 2 cable connecting Finland and Estonia. This coincided with a power outage reported by Fingrid. By now, NATO was fed up, and the alliance's newest member, Finland, was not in a forgiving mood. Within hours, Eagle S was intercepted by Finnish naval commandos who took over the ship and directed her into Finnish waters. Authorities soon discovered Eagle S, she was short one anchor. Eagle S was declared seized by Finnish authorities and by December 28th was moved to Porvoo off Helsinki for further investigation. At the time of this report, no valid insurance was found for the ship, her latest policy having expired in August 2024. The power company Fingrid has initiated civil litigation for the cost of repairing damage to the undersea power cable. On 2 January, the company requested the seizure and forfeiture of Eagle S and her cargo to pay for damages. Which brings us to 7 January. The Swedish Navy has located the missing anchor of Eagle S at a depth of 80 meters, 300 feet, and toward the end of a drag line on the same course Eagle S had taken on Christmas Day. The anchor was recovered and handed over to Finnish investigators. Not surprisingly, the anchor showed damage, with one fluke missing. This was literally the smoking gun. Clearly there's a pattern. Clearly a gray zone campaign of accidental sabotage is being waged against NATO and EU infrastructure in the Baltic. And clearly the hidden hand in these operations is Russian. Despite an increasing blowback, Russia considers that it benefits from damaged infrastructure, interfering with commerce, degrading information infrastructure, and the disruption of European energy supplies. And as this article went to press, news broke of the discovery of yet another attempt to sabotage Baltic Sea cables. Over the weekend, an underwater inspection team located anchored drag marks close to the Nord-Balt power cable connecting Lithuania and Sweden. This latest sabotage effort failed, but the pattern and the perpetrator is getting pretty obvious. This latest Nord-Balt sabotage attempt has raised security concerns, particularly as it coincides with the planned synchronization of the Baltic electric systems with the European Union's power grid. The repeated nature of these accidents has led to increased scrutiny and security measures in the Baltic, which is now often referred to as a high-risk zone. NATO has conducted exercises like the recent freezing winds to bolster the defense of this critical maritime region, acknowledging the strategic importance and vulnerability of the area's infrastructure. These incidents raise questions about maritime security, the ease of executing such attacks, and the political motivations behind them, highlighting a new dimension of hybrid warfare where economic and communication lifelines become potential targets. Finland's confiscation of Eagle S is a definitive first step in ending Moscow's cable-cutting operations in the Baltic. The seizure of these ships at the scene is the only mechanism to halt the Kremlin's prowling operations in the Baltic. Until this practice of instant karma becomes policy, we can expect Moscow to conduct more mischief in the Baltic and beyond. For the Kyiv Post, I'm Navy SEAL Chuck Farr, and I'll see you again at the point of impact.